A journey along the path through the past, from Skagafjörður to Siglufjörður, where historic sites mark the changes in Icelandic life over the centuries. Gleimbyr, the product of 1,000 years' experience of living in turf houses. Hólar, an ancient school and cultural center. Víðimýri Church symbolizes the spiritual life of ages past. In Hofsós, the story of emigrants who sought a new life in a new land. At Sauðárkrókur, the smithy of the farmer who moved to the village. And in Siglufjörður, the story of the herring era, a foundation stone of modern-day society. From the time of the settlement to the end of the 19th century, Icelanders mostly lived in the countryside, where they raised livestock and fished. For 1100 years, most people lived in turf houses, varying in size and style. The small cottage farms, by far the most common, have pretty much disappeared, but a number of the larger farms have been preserved. One of these is the old farm Gleimbyr in Skagafjörður. It's made of the turf, stone and timber, which were Icelanders' basic building materials until the late 19th century. The farm is made up of many buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries, joined together by corridors. There you'll find reception rooms, a fully equipped kitchen of the period, and 3 larders where food was kept and distributed. The main building was the baðstofa, where people slept, ate and worked. At Gleimbyr we can experience a different world and time, distant from our own. We imagine life as it was lived by those who once walked its rooms and corridors. We see how a well-to-do 19th century home was furnished and equipped, and the way of life that developed over the centuries within its turf walls. Every summer during the second weekend in July, the old tools of the house and field are dusted off and put to use, demonstrating former work methods. Beside Gleimbyr there are 2 19th century wooden houses, examples of the building style that replaced the turf houses, and both of great historical importance. One is called Gilstofan, and the other is called Alshúsið, where traditional Icelandic refreshments are available. In Víðimýri Church, built in 1834, they still have Sunday services. They're quite different from services in the early years of Christianity. Víðimýri Church is a jewel of Icelandic architecture, a building unlike any in the world. The church at Gröf, which originated in the time of Catholicism, is one of the smallest churches in Iceland. Such farm churches played an important role as gathering places in their time, keeping customs and traditions alive from one generation to the next. Hólar became a bishopric in 1106 and has for centuries been a magnet for people, culture and knowledge. It was long the source of news from the outside world. The people of Skagafjörður trace their well-known singing tradition to the 12th century and the time of the first bishop. The present church is the 5th cathedral to be built at Hólar. Built in 1763, it's one of the oldest stone houses in Iceland, a splendid monument to the centuries of spiritual life in this place. Impressive though it may be, however, the building is a good deal smaller than the wooden churches that preceded it. The cathedral at Hólar contains many treasures from Catholic times that are unequalled in Iceland. Among the most impressive are an altarpiece from the 1520s given to the cathedral by Jón Arason, the last Catholic bishop of Iceland, and a crucifix from the same period. The beautifully carved 17th century Baroque baptismal font was made by a local farmer. There were 23 Catholic bishops at Hólar and 13 Lutheran ones. Guðmundur the Good Arason, bishop in the 13th century, was popular with the common people because of his generosity and powers of healing. Jón Arason brought first a printing press to Iceland, and publications from Hólar played a vital role in preserving the Icelandic language, not least in the time of the second Lutheran bishop, Guðbrandur Þorláksson, who had the Bible translated into Icelandic and published in 1584. An extant painting of Guðbrandur is the oldest known portrait of an Icelander. The church tower was built in 1950 in memory of Jón Arason and his sons. Clergy and other scholars graduated from the school operating at Hólar from the early 12th century until 1801. The Hólar school was re-established as an agricultural school in 1882, the farmers' response to technical innovation and massive rural depopulation. The school has always been at the forefront in strengthening agriculture in Iceland. It specializes in fish farming, tourism, and the history and breeding of the Icelandic horse. Today, nearly 9 centuries after the bishopric was first established at Hólar, science and education are still central to the role of this ancient seat of learning. Towards the end of the 19th century, the ties that held the ancient farming society together began to loosen. Among the many reasons for this was the fact that economic development was very slow, and people couldn't wait forever for new opportunities. One result was that thousands of Icelanders emigrated to North America, where they could see the chance of a new life. Exhibits at the Icelandic Emigration Center, such as New Land, New Life, give insight into this period and bring to light the turning point when a 1,000-year-old way of life suddenly came to an end. We learn of conditions here in Iceland and the reasons for the social changes. We accompany the emigrants as they journey to the New World and settle there between 1870 and 1914. What could be better than acquiring new and fertile land and being able to do what they knew best, farming? Many of the emigrants maintain traditions from home, and the emigrants and their descendants have shown their former fatherland a sincere and rarely found loyalty. The exhibits at the Icelandic Emigration Center give insights into this important period of Icelandic history. The center also specializes in genealogical and other information about the emigrants and their descendants. But not everyone emigrated, of course. In Sauðárkrókur we find the forge of the farmer who left his isolated farm and adapted to the new ways of life in town. He'd learned the blacksmith's trade from his father before him and set up a smithy in the basement of his home in town. His main work from then on was blacksmithing, while his wife worked at the fish plant alongside her housework. He was an inventive man and made very many useful things, such as a hay bulldozer and a hand-powered mower. He was well into his 80s when he stopped working at his anvil at Suðurgata 5. The forge has been kept just as he left it. In Siglufjörður, one can see how fishing in the new age of machine-powered ships changed Icelanders' way of life. With increased cod and herring fishing after 1900, the emigration to North America more or less drew to a close. The Norwegians began to fish for herring in the latter part of the 19th century and discovered that there was a great deal of herring off the north coast of Iceland every summer. Numerous villages came into being around good harbors, from the western fjords to the northeast. Little by little, the Icelanders took over the fishing and processing. A class of fishing boat owners emerged, and the poor left the countryside and moved to the herring stations. This development continued until the late 1960s and has been called the Icelandic herring adventure. Siglufjörður was the best known of all the fishing plants. Over a 40-year period, this tiny village became one of the largest towns in Iceland. At the Herring Era Museum, the history of this adventure is told in varied detail. The main museum building is at Roaldsbrakki, a Norwegian herring station built in 1907, which was for many years one of the largest in the country. Nets and tools were stored on the ground floor, and on the third floor of the building we can see what sort of accommodation was provided for the herring workers who lived there over the summer. On pleasant summer days, the old herring station comes back to life. Herring is gutted and salted on the pier in front of the building. Then an accordion provides music for a traditional pier dance, where the museum's guests play their part in reenacting the adventures of the past. Welcome to the path through the past, from Skagafjörður to Siglufjörður.